Good evening and welcome to Stories for the Cooped Up and Captive. This evening I did a little bit of pre-game inspection. You see, last week I told what I thought was a pretty decent story. I played it back for my wife and she said it was okay, except I had a nasal inclusion. I had to delete it and start all over again. Anyway, this week I got a telephone call from a good friend from vet school named Kevin Zollers. Kevin Zollers and I had a very similar taste in music, and he had just heard Corb Lund do Talkin' Veterinarian's Blues. Asked me if I'd ever heard of him. Well, as a matter of fact, I had, because a few years back, Corb Lund was between Milwaukee and Minneapolis and had a Wednesday night open. Came to Tyranina Brewing Company and played a show on 12 hours notice. In any event, the story I'm going to tell you tonight is included in my first book, and includes Kevin Zollers. It's called When Love Comes to Town. Inspired by the global success of Live Aid, conceived to bring awareness to the ongoing famine in Ethiopia, Willie Nelson, John Mellencamp, and Neil Young organized a movement to bring aid and awareness to the struggling American family farmer. Farm Aid 1 took place on September the 22nd, 1985 in Champaign, Illinois. The iconic lineup ranged from Texas songwriter Joe Ely to the Mount Rushmore of country music: Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cass, and Chris Christopherson. Performing at 10 a.m. may have been wholly out of character for Bon Jovi and Tom Petty, but they held nothing back. Few will forget Billy Joel's maniacal 22 minutes on piano, vocals, and at least 3 pots of coffee. There were 44 acts, each one a giant in their genre, and that day they brought it all. Ask any of the 80,000 of us who were there, soaked and frozen for 14 hours. It was 45 degrees and driving rain all day long. And every note to name the single most enduring moment, and half, without hesitation, will say B.B. King. 6 days past his 60th birthday, navy blue 3-piece suit and a tie, center stage with Lucille strapped high around his neck, a football stadium in the palm of his hand, he eased into The Thrill Is Gone. Let the record show that day, and 2.5 decades to follow, nothing could be further from the truth. With a Hammond B3 organ underpinning the urgency, he pined, "I'll still live on, baby, but how lonely I'll be." With 80,000 people feeling the pain, he dropped his head, pulled his elbows tight, and Lucille close. He launched one of his trademark guitar sermons. As he paused to bend his bottom 3 strings and tug at your soul, his B string snapped. Oblivious to the driving rain, without a pause or opening his eyes, he slipped out a replacement string with a few whole notes and 3 soft choruses of The Thrill Is Gone from the congregation, swaying in synchrony. Clapping on the downbeats, the 58 Gibson was restrung in tune. Before the thunderous applause would quiet, the undisputed king of the blues and master showman launched. As if to demonstrate that the blues is all about feeling good, about feeling bad, he romped through, let the good times roll, and took every last one of us with him. 10 years later, I was blessed to be able to ring in 1996 with a dozen of my best friends and B.B. King. By then, he sat through most of his shows, but what he had lost as a performer, he had gained as a statesman. He was the headliner and in charge, to be certain, but the venue was the magnificent Grand Central Station in Chicago. We had arrived early and were close enough that we could reach out and touch his wingtips. My vision of midnight was a beaming B.B. King, sitting and strumming rhythm as 2 of his disciples, Sonny Landreth and John Hyatt, worked the crowd and their instruments. It is without an ounce of overstatement that B.B. King was deeply influenced everyone who has ever strapped on and plugged in an electric guitar since 1950. Through the middle of his career, he averaged over 250 appearances a year, and in 1956, he played an exhausting 342 shows, possibly to pay his alimony payments. He has performed for presidents, won 15 Grammys in 4 categories, Medals of Freedom, and art heritage been awarded honorary doctorates and decorated from Portland, Maine to Stockholm, Sweden. He was unanimously voted to the Blues and Rock and Roll Halls of Fame. Not to be overlooked is that his career spanned decades when James Hood was denied interest at the University of Alabama and Rosa Parks was expected to sit in the back of a bus. As our country struggled to integrate artists like B.B. King, Willie Nelson, Ray Charles, and the great Earl Scruggs were famously and demonstrably colorblind. He appeared and recorded with countless artists ranging from the Rolling Stones to Eric Clapton and U2. After a show on the campus at the University of Illinois, a good friend, Kevin Zollers, wanted to meet the man, hoping his son would be able to absorb the history he had just witnessed, even though he had yet to be born. His wife, Kim, was 8 months pregnant and feeling anything but attractive. For her, the thrill was indeed gone. Familiar with the auditorium, we knocked on the stage door, which promptly opened, and a handler nodded with a smile and promised he would ask. In minutes, the door opened, and there stood the King of the Blues. Kevin was composed, if not original. He shook hands and clasped the elbow of B.B. King, unfazed that he had sweat through his sport coat in the course of the 90-minute show. Kevin thanked him for all that his music had meant to him, and how cool it was when he changed a string in the middle of a solo during Barmaid. As if he had no place to be, Mr. King smiled graciously and asked where we were from and what we did for a living. As we answered, Kim tried to make herself small. Not easy for a woman within weeks of delivering a baby, as she drifted a half step back and to the end of the line. Politely, and without breaking conversation, B.B. King wiped his hands on a white cloth, flung over his shoulder, and dropped to one knee before Kim. He covered her left hand with both of his, looked up at the expectant and particularly self-conscious mother, and spoke softly. "Little lady, there ain't nothing in the world more beautiful than a pregnant woman." B.B. King has been recognized and voted among the best and most influential artists and guitarists of our time, which only serves to magnify his grace and humility. B.B. King is a credit to his race, the human race. If all else fails, keep something moving forward.